Thanks for coming. We debated a little bit how to make this as interesting as we could for all of you, and one way was we could tell you the greatest old stories in the history of rock and roll, and maybe we can do that at a bar. But here, we discussed an idea that really captured my imagination when Danny first mentioned it. Alphabet, formerly known as Google, run by Eric Schmidt, wrote an interesting article for the BBC just a couple of weeks ago, actually. And in it talked about a topic that really ignites a lot of debate. If I can paraphrase, those of us that, you'll help me, love and discover music, Danny, could be in his article termed as elitists. And there was a debate between music curation by individuals versus the machine and the algorithms. So what was it about reading that article that really made you light up and feel the need to respond?
Firstly, I don't think there's any question that technology and algorithms and research are very, very valuable in helping people understand what other people are excited about, and in no way would I ever suggest that shouldn't be part of the mix. It's going to be anyway, and I like looking at charts and how many streams people have as much as anybody. But what he said was that that it was more democratic to have the public writ large sort of introduce each other to music than to have elites. Firstly, I always feel it's a little weird when a billionaire is railing against elites. One suspects there's some other agenda there, and it was hard for me not to think that what he was doing was taking a shot at some of Google's competitors. They have YouTube, extremely influential way that a lot of people discover and listen to music, and God knows what else they're cooking up. And of course, we're all watching Apple to see what they're going to grow into in terms of the new iteration of how they connect music to fans. And meanwhile, Spotify is, a very powerful element in the mix, and there's other services like Tidal and RDO and others that are Pandora that are all doing this. But it touched a nerve in me, which is not a new issue, is that there's always been a huge difference between pop hits, songs that just magically spread very quickly, and the kind of artists that take more time to find an audience. And a lot of my favorite artists over the years, whether it's Bob Dylan, Springsteen, U2, Bob Marley, the entire genre of hip-hop, the entire genre of punk, none of those had what we today would call viral entrances into the world. They took a few years of word of mouth and of elites, of people who spent hours and hours and hours studying and listening to music and thinking about the culture, championing them, whether it was people at record companies or whether it was people at certain radio stations, not all of them. There were periods of time when MTV played that role, and periods of time when MTV was doing the research and just trying to play the top 10. But there have been periods where print and people writing about music was important, whether it's Rolling Stone or whether it's Complex or whether it's Pitchfork, because the reality is that a lot of music that becomes very, very important culturally sounds very different from what people are used to listening to, and it takes a while to hear it more than once, and to hear other people talk about it, and to grow into embracing it. And you need both. So there's a certain mentality that wants to eliminate middlemen. And there are a lot of middlemen that should be eliminated because they've simply become obsolete. My first job was working at Billboard, and I used to call record stores to help them compile the charts, and I would manually write down what the top 10 were, and we had a checklist of all the singles to see if they were selling heavy, medium, or light, and that was how the charts were compiled for decades. And then barcodes came along, and that was definitely an improvement. And the idea of people manually writing things down and being more easily corrupted in terms of calculating what was selling, those jobs deserve to be eliminated. They were genuinely obsolete. And there are a lot of things that are genuinely obsolete because of progress in technology. But the idea of art and music only being rewarded if it makes an instantaneous effect on people will eliminate huge categories of culture. And I don't think it's rational. I think it's delusional to think that every single thing can be done by researching current attitudes. I gave the example, I wrote a rant on Huffington Post, again, just to create the context for this. And, at the peak of American Idol, there was this perception that, well, that's replaced all curation. The public is deciding who stars are. And they did create a number of stars, but they also were very narrow in the kind of music of the stars that they created. And if you go back to 2006 or 2007 and see other trends in music at that time coming through very alternative, curated, elite-driven media, an artist like Arcade Fire today means a lot more by any measurement, commercially or culturally, than, say, Daughtry does. So you need just multiple streams, and I think when you get very powerful people suggesting that there's no curation that is appropriate and everything can be done by their algorithms, you're looking at a negative vibe that's they're going to undermine the blossoming of creativity. And then on the other hand, I don't know that everything Apple's doing is working and everything that they're going to do is working, and I'm not even sure they're the ones that are going to crack this. But I do know that to do anything that creatively matters requires a lot of experimentation and failure. And that the idea that something's not working right at the beginning, is catnip to the haters who want to, go against, anybody successful or anybody that has a job that they wish they had. But I think the reality is that all of the media, whether it was Rolling Stone, whether it was MTV, whether it's Pitchfork, whatever is going to be in the future, whether it was the iPod came out after years of unsuccessful MP3 players. I just think it's a creative process to figure out how to connect with an audience. And this era of streaming is new. And I was an early adopter to streaming. I'm a late adopter to almost everything, but I'm a music freak. And I was a Rhapsody subscriber right away because I love the idea of having access to music. But how to present it in a way that's really culturally exciting is going to take some sort of creative vision by an actual flawed human being, not likely to be created by an algorithm, in my opinion.
I think that for everyone in this room, the hardest problem in a music path is to figure out how to make as much money as possible. I want to talk not about...
I'm just trying to make any money.
Not about, about any money. I want to talk about promotion because you mentioned radio, you mentioned MTV, and I think, having worked closely in our company with YouTube for years, it was a lot more fun when I started in 2006 and 2007 when they had editors for different categories. So we'd make a music video, we'd call the music editor, comedy video, call the comedy editor. And if they liked our work, they'd put it on the homepage of YouTube. And if the work was good, and if the work was on the homepage of YouTube, we get millions of views. So now when that's removed from not just Google and YouTube, but a lot of other companies, how do you, in the artist manager hat that you wear, think in the current moment about the best ways to promote your artists if, again, the idea is that maybe I'll search for Steve Earle and find something on YouTube, but what if I don't?
Well, firstly, no two artists are the same. So each artist, and it's like what the last discussion was about. Some artists are very aggressive in doing social networking and some are not. Some are very good at creating a narrative. Steve Earle, for example, is very sophisticated about creating a narrative for everything he does. He did a bluegrass record, he did some political records, he's doing a duets record with Sean Colvin. He always creates something that, whatever the prevailing media is, to give them something to talk about so that he's not just dependent on having a hit song, which he hasn't had very many conventional hit songs in his career, but he always has a story. So I think that a lot of it starts with having a narrative and a story. How you disseminate the narrative is going to change as technology and media change. But if you don't have a good story, it really doesn't matter how you're disseminating it. Peaches, who I manage, is incredibly resourceful at creating a lot of content at a relatively low price. So she has a new album that came out last week, and she's done 10 videos that she funded herself out of a publishing advance. And Margaret Cho did one, and Kim Gordon is in one, and so she has the capability of creating an enormous amount of extra content combined with her narrative of very sex positive vision of what a modern woman is, so I spend a lot of time with my clients trying to help them focus on what they control, which is their story, their graphics, to the extent they want to engage with fans, to the extent they have visions for videos. Some of them write books. Steve Earle has a book coming out. Laura Jane Grace of Against Me has a book coming out. She did a 10-part reality thing for AOL about her transition as a transgender woman. That every artist has different pluses and minuses, and some of them it's really much more old school in terms of just staying on the road, touring, going to the merch booth afterwards, collecting names, and being in touch with your fans. Because to me, that's what the artist can control, is what they do, and to make sure that what they're doing is going to connect with people emotionally, not be boring. And then in terms of what the prevailing media is, we deal with everybody. I mean, we do lyric videos on YouTube. We still try to get videos played on whatever the outlets are, like Vivo. We encourage everybody to. Some of my clients do a lot of social networking. Some of them don't do any, and we just do it for them. And that's not as exciting, but it's better than nothing. We deal with commercial radio because there are still people in some parts of this country that will put up with commercials to get their music, and we want them to hear it. I know they exist. It's mind-blowing. Nobody in my family has listened to a commercial combined with music for a long time. Obviously, Sirius has grown into a pretty relevant force, and the television shows are very useful. And then, of course, it's a global business. So the strategy really varies from country to country and from artist to artist.
I'm going to make sure the audience, make sure the audience has a chance to ask some questions in a minute, but I want to ask you about one other form of promotion. You're working as a consultant right now with three wise guy indie creators, Martin Scorsese, Mick Jagger, and Terrence Winter. This is a HBO series coming in a couple months called Vinyl, about the rock and roll music business in the 70s. I think what I want to ask you about that is how important you think it is for musicians and people on both sides of the fence of both creative and music now to be looking more towards films, television, and getting music inside other media.
Again, it depends on the artist, but it's certainly a time when there are tools that were not previously available to musicians to reach people. Even though we lament the decline of some of the radio formats that I loved, we lament the fact that there's not an MTV that can blast a music video to the whole country quickly. It's a golden era for music documentaries. I think that there, Rodriguez was one of the famous examples of someone who literally was given a career in his early 70s by a documentary. But there are a lot of people that are really enhanced and helped by documentaries, and there might not be. The movie theater is always available, but because of Netflix and Amazon and other ways of getting films out there, I think that's really become an important tool. We did one with Steve Earle years ago called Just an American Boy that really helped broaden the impact of one of his records when he wrote a controversial song. There's also the arena of theater that really for decades was sort of a separate culture than the rock and roll record type of musical artists. And even when Paul Simon tried to do it, it didn't quite connect. With Cape Man, didn't connect commercially. I mean, artistically, I actually think Cape Man was kind of underrated in its time and is worth listening to. But now you see situations like Green Day taking An American Idiot to Broadway, and Cyndi Lauper writing the music for Kinky Boots. And so a number of the people I work with are looking at theater. Theater is also an area where songwriters get paid in a very reliable way. that structure that was created back in the old days really works for them. In terms of the arena of cable television and another golden age of these long-form novelistic dramas, some of them connect with music, some of them don't. Steve Earle, again, is somebody who has another talent as an actor, and he had a recurring role in The Wire and was one of the stars of Treme. But that really had to do more with his self-expression and a relationship he has with David Simon. I wouldn't look at that as a promotional tactic. And then, of course, we've got these TV shows that are having tremendous success about music, Nashville and Empire. And we'll see if vinyl has the same impact on early 70s culture. But the virtue commercially of Nashville and Empire is they're dealing with contemporary music, and I don't think there's any question that they're reaching numbers of people with music that there's just no other way of reaching. So it's an interesting arena. We do everything we can. Again, each artist has different strengths and weaknesses and opportunities, but that has partially compensated for the decline of the old school music media.
So whether it's about where we started, which is woman and man versus machine on music curation, or the record labels this man has run, or the artists this man has worked with, please feel free. I believe there is a mic on each side, so feel free to step up.
Please, somebody ask a question. It'll really hurt my feelings if
on,
no one has
vinyl,
any.
let me ask you one other question on vinyl. Are they going to go just archival music, or are they putting any new music in, or do you know yet?
I don't think it's cool for me to really be a public spokesperson about vinyl. Yeah. I'm a consultant. It's one of the great honors of my life. I love working with those people, and Bobby Cannavale, who's the star of the show, and it was just this kind of present that God gave me to be involved with it. But there are people whose job it's going to be to talk about the show, and I think I better leave it to them, or else somebody's going to get mad at me.
And it looks very violent, so I want to make sure you stay healthy. What was for you the first artist that not just hit you as a fan, but hit you and said, I want in. I want to call this my job. What artist did that for you?
Well, I would answer it in two ways. One is when I was a kid in high school, seeing the movie Don't Look Back about Bob Dylan, and that there was this guy standing next to him in a lot of the scenes that was apparently his manager. I later learned his name was Albert Grossman. And I always knew I had no musical talent. I couldn't sing or play an instrument or anything like that. But that was a job, like to be the guy helping somebody like Bob Dylan, that just seemed to me like that's something maybe I could do. Then once I got into the business, I started as a trade journalist. I saw, before he got his first record deal, Loudon Wainwright III. And this was 1969, and long time ago, 46 years ago, and I'm still a huge fan of Loudon Wainwright III, and I got to know him then. I was quoted in the first ad for his first album, the only quote in that ad, and at that point I thought I'd made it. Like, what could possibly be better than being quoted in an ad for an artist I liked? So he was definitely one that, just to see him up close, his brilliance with lyrics and the kind of performer he was made me feel like, wow, if I could do anything to help somebody like that and be part of something like that, it would really make my life more meaningful. So those were two early ones.
Everyone knows that, if we went into the time machine all the way back to about the year 2000, and a 19-year-old boy invents Napster, and a lot of people get the idea that stealing music is a fine thing. How have your ways of judging success changed as it gets harder and harder to make money in the music business? Is success making $1 more than it costs to make the album? I mean, has money become less of a factor? I used to ride the train every day with a friend who would brag how much music he stole, in those first minutes of Napster, and I looked at him and said, I don't do that. But it became the thing. So obviously your business life became much harder. Do you have a different view now about what success is if I'm an artist and I come to you and say, please manage me?
Well, the phrase the music business has always been misleading. It's really the music businesses, plural. And one of the music businesses is the performing business, touring and clubs and concerts and festivals. And that's an incredibly easy way to determine success, which is how many tickets did you sell? And somehow or other, notwithstanding all the changes in technology, try to get into Madison Square Garden without a ticket, not going to happen. So that business model works for artists. It's physically rigorous, but it's always been one of the exciting parts of the music businesses. And with the decline financially of the value of recordings, the importance of performing in terms of looking at the economics of a career has grown.
When you're discovering...
Dude, I don't think we have any questions.
I can't tell. Oh, there's a hand up there. Sorry. Can you grab that mic, which is just behind you?
Thank you so much for making me feel relevant.
Sure, big fan of bumping into geniuses, so glad you could speak here. We've talked a lot about how management has changed over the years and with changes in the physical distribution of music and a lot of the changes that the industry's been undergoing. But what aspects of management have stayed the same over the sort of switch?
Well, the aspect of management that has been part of a continuous stream is the relationship between a manager and an artist is still the central element of management. I was just saying to another manager the other day that a lot of the things that we do, making deals and trying to negotiate some more money and trying to help with the media, planning tours and logistical servicing, is really the easy part of the business. The complicated part of the business, the part of the business that makes the difference between, to me, a great manager and one that's not great, is the quality of the relationship between the manager and the artist. And that has to really do, of course it varies from, it's human, it varies from person to person, from manager to manager, from artist to artist, but that ability to plan together with no one else listening, okay, what do you really want? What really will you do? What really won't you do? And to deliver the news, this is what's working, this is what's not working, and here are some possible options to try to make things better. That part of it is really very similar, even though all of the different details of how you address the problems have changed so much.
On the other side, microphone's in the aisle there if you want to grab it.
My question is, how do you get streaming services to have a higher value proposition? I know a lot of my friends, I'm 21, so a lot of my college friends just don't want to pay for streaming. And when you go to like a party or anything, everybody's using YouTube and they're cord cutting through basically all the platforms. So how can you get a millennial generation to buy into the fact that paying $9.99 for every song in the world is like the best thing?
Well, that's the key question facing all of the music businesses right now, and that is, as they said back in the day, the $64 question. And the answer, only answer I can give is a vague one, and it's you've got to make people excited enough. People pay for concert tickets. They're very expensive. They're more expensive than they've ever been relative to, even with factoring in inflation, because they want to be part of the community and have that experience of going to a concert. So people pay for HBO, which is not cheap, because they want to be able to talk about Veep's new season or The Leftovers or whatever is happening. People pay for the New York Times because after 5 articles, if you don't subscribe to it, you can't read the other articles. And the New York Times, even though there's a zillion different ways of getting the news, there's a certain quality and charisma and status of the particular analysis that they give that people pay for. And this is what I was getting at when I was critiquing Eric Schmidt's theory that it's all going to be about an algorithm. You've got to make it so exciting that people feel they need to pay for it because they don't want to be left out. And, that takes creativity. People pay for Sirius. One of the reasons they pay for it is Howard Stern. He's unique. At the time they made the deal with Howard Stern, people made fun of, they're overpaying him, this is the stupidest deal ever. Meanwhile, because they had him, I think was one of the key elements that gave them the the business power to then take over XM and to build a company that, as far as I understand, Sirius makes money now, despite the fact that they pay Howard Stern a lot of money. And why are people subscribing to that when they could be streaming in their car, Spotify or whatever, or putting their iPods through back in the day or whatever? There has to be some programming element that's exciting enough. I'm as old as I am, there are still things that I'm too young for. And one of the things that I've read about but don't really remember is the beginning of the television set business. And what I've read is that when TV sets first came out, they were mainly a way of seeing live sports, and they were selling okay. And then Milton Berle did this comedy show, and people had to buy a television because they had to see the Milton Berle show. So I don't know whether it's curation, whether it's something like Beats One, whether it's exclusive content, but there's going to have to be enough creative added value to make people want to pay for it. And I don't think it's going to happen with an algorithm. I think it's going to happen with some weird creative type who's probably going to have a big ego and be difficult to deal with, who's going to figure out how to be amazing enough that people want to pay for it. And that's the history of all media, and that's what they have to confront. They're in show business. They're not just in the delivery business. If they think they're just delivering things, you're right, a lot of people aren't going to want to pay for it. If they create something exciting that people want to be part of, like every other successful form of media that people pay for, people will pay for that, and they haven't done it yet.
Yeah, thank you.
Danny, one of the things I know, I had the fortune of working closely with both of you, and besides your music cred, one of the things I know about you is your passion for social change and politics. And that used to be a big part of music too, right? And so, there used to be things like the concert for Bangladesh and No Nukes, which you helped produce, and all of these, even Live Aid and all these kinds of things. And it just feels, unless I'm just sleeping or something, that you don't see that much of that these days. What's your take on that?
I think you see it when it's appropriate. I mean, you think of the first election when Barack Obama was elected. I think the Will I Am video was a huge part of that way that Obama entered the consciousness for a lot of younger people. On an older tip, Steve Earle just put out a song a few weeks ago about the Confederate flag in Mississippi. We did in partnership with Southern Poverty Law Center that resonated a lot in the South. I think it comes from artists. I think not every political issue lends itself to artists' engagement, but I think in general the community of artists, Miley Cyrus, for example, very socially active. She's got this Happy Hippie Foundation, is constantly doing things. So I think that connectivity still exists culturally. It's a little harder for us older folks to always recognize it in younger generations, but I don't think the older generations had any monopoly on social consciousness. I actually think today's young creative community is very, very engaged.
I want to thank you so much for agreeing to come out and do this, and I also want to thank you for championing artists that can get into our heads and our insides over time and not in 15 seconds with the click of a mouse. So thank you.
I'm so grateful to be here with all the cool new people, and thank you for giving me a little role in this event.
Appreciate it.